Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us on day one of Family Mediation Week. I'm Sarah Manning, and I am a partner at Hall Brown Solicitors, who are proud sponsors of Family Mediation Week. As well as a solicitor, I'm also an accredited mediator. The aim of Family Mediation Week is to help the public understand what family mediation is, and also to raise awareness to professionals such as yourselves in contact with separating couples about mediation. Often when someone's facing difficulties in their relationship, it can affect their mental health and in turn an employee's performance at work. The seminar today aims to provide information to yourself as employers to be aware and mindful of the impact separation can have on their workforce. We also aim to provide useful information to employers to pass on to their employees to support them going through a divorce or separation. We hope that today's webinar will start conversations within management to look at their policies on employees going through separation, or if you don't have one, to consider making one. Also put in place resources and information that will help employees and have this ready to send out to them if you're aware that they are going through separation or family difficulties. I also have with me today James Hayhurst, who is going to talk about key initiatives that he is involved in to raise awareness of the help businesses can offer to support their employees going through separation, and more about the Parents' Promise. We've also got Gary O'Brien, who's a chartered financial planner from Ardent, and share how he can assist and provide reassurance to anyone separating who may be worried about their financial situation. There will be time at the end for question and answers, so please feel free to put them forwards in the chat box and we'll get to there at the end. We've also got Julie with us from the Family Mediation Council, who is helping us with slides. So James, I'm going to pass on to you now to run through your initiative. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, and Julie's very kindly on slides, so we'll see if we can get in lockstep pretty quickly. But yeah, thank you all for attending. So this is just a little bit of background about the Parents' Promise and the Positive Parenting Alliance, and then more specifically an initiative we launched about this time last year in the area of HR and sort of supporting people going through that transition. So background, very quick background. So I'm James, and this is based, the idea, or my background professionally, is kind of advertising and communications. And that really was an angle I wanted to take in terms of changing how we separate in the UK. There's a photo of me about 10 years ago when I was less grey, prior to my own journey in terms of separation and kind of what I learned from that. So I wanted to bring a different perspective to how we separate, because I was aware that it's an issue that doesn't really get talked about very much, and when it does, it's quite gender toxic. So could we create something that was going to spark conversations in a different way? Next slide. It's been a bit of a journey, but behind the Parents' Promise is the Positive Parenting Alliance. Here are just a few logos on the screen. There's some pretty big ones in terms of the impact they have around children and young people. The Place to Be probably being the one to call out there. And we wanted to bring together a broad consensus of, child-focused, centrist organisations who could come together on an issue which is very important and very damaging to mental health of our small people and the adults involved too. So we go to the next slide. And this is on our website, so we'll be posting our website, which also has information around the HR initiative as well. But this is, I suppose, why we're doing what we're doing. It's really to say that lots of people go through this separation, and a large number of people are affected. The data are actually very bad, very patchy, but the latest estimate from the Family Solutions Group from a couple of years ago is about 280,000 families or children going through this every year. And our role as the Parents' Promise is we want parents to make a commitment to their children today, not in front of their children at call, but to each other in case there's a relationship breakdown tomorrow. And if you're going to go on to the next slide, this is what the Parents' Promise is. So it's a very simple conversation starter, really, on something that we don't want to talk about. And it's saying, if we, for whatever reason, aren't together in the future, can we make our commitment to ourselves? Can we hold ourselves accountable in this way? Really simple, very basic promise that any child of ours will see lots of us and our wider family, that we will always keep you safe and be respectful to each other, and we will work together in partnership. So something that it sounds like would be easy to do and should be easy to do, but often we know people fall down at this stage. So that's the parents' promise. If we just go on the next slide. This is one of the reasons we need it. So I told you I worked in PR. So this is a survey we did before launch. We discovered that pretty much 90% of us parents have actually discussed, probably in some detail, what we'd do if we win the lottery, and dreamt of the beaches and the holidays we'd go on. But only 5% had ever talked about what they might do if they were to split up. So it's a huge area of cognitive dissonance for the nation, and that means it's unhelpful because if we can make these commitments, hopefully we'll never need to draw on the commitments, but if we can make them when we're in a better space, hopefully we can hold ourselves to them. Next slide. So that we launched the Parents Promise in 2022, I think, yeah. And we then wanted to, the idea is that we'll try and do something in culture every year that changes the conversation around separation, and hopefully then legal and other changes will follow. So in terms of the HR initiative, we spotted a couple of years out that this was an area where we thought we could make quite big change, and hopefully quite easily. And this came really from personal experience. So I, during my journey, worked at an advertising agency where I was managing director, and then I worked for Unilever. Both organisations were very supportive of me during the process, but I kind of realised, particularly when I came to Unilever, where it was such an amazing organisation, still is, with so many benefits to get the right levels of work-life balance. I suddenly realised there wasn't an initiative for this kind of thing. So we thought that if we could create an initiative for this, we would help lay the groundwork for better mental health support, and we would help parents realise that separation is something they need to take seriously and to do it in the best way. So the initiative, we wanted companies like yourselves to think about adopting and then putting in the policy are these, and hopefully much easier post-COVID, where a lot of these things I think are covered. The first one, and the big one, is just to recognise it as a life event. We've got really great and much more far-reaching HR policies around all sorts of things now that happen in our lives. Separation happens to lots of people, and can we just acknowledge it as such, and then make a certain number of benefits, or kind of standard benefits, just almost accessible under that subheading. Things that we thought might be useful under that subheading: flexible working, which again post-COVID is much better. But if you're going to separate consciously as a couple and do it well, you're going to need to reconfigure your life over the next 6-12 months while you sort living arrangements and life changes. So someone who used to do pickups maybe now has to do them, or doesn't used to do them now does have to do them. So can we have flexible working so that people can do that? There may be other appointments you need to make with professionals too. Recognizing that it's a really difficult period emotionally, so pointing employees to counselling, etc., when it's available. And then the fourth thing we've produced, and this will be downloadable for you all afterwards, is there's both too much information around divorce and separation and not enough useful information on the internet. So given the breadth of our partners involved, we were able to produce some really useful and pithy resources that can point people to the right help and advice depending where they are, and hopefully help people start this journey in the most compassionate and child-focused way. So we can make those available to you all shortly. That's what we want to do. Next slide. This is yet another stat, which hopefully is important for all of you to, and I'm sure you'll be aware of this, is 95%, not a surprise, of people going through separation said it affected their mental health in the workplace. But to the point I made earlier, not many employers have a specific policy on separation, so we wanted to change that. Next slide. Oh, that's me. This is we launched at Parliament. So that's Sir Andrew McFarlane, who is the head of the family court, so it's got really good traction. And Siobhan Bailey in the middle is MP for Stroud. If you just click on this, if it works, will be great. It's a little video about what we did. If it doesn't work, we will email it to you all. But should we just try and play and see if we have any success?
I wanted to come into this place to make a difference. That's why it's fantastic to work with so many different organisations to actually create new ways of working and new ways of supporting families.
This is actually a bigger idea than we may realise, because it's one of those great ideas that's obvious in retrospect.
The main commitment we're asking for today is for HR leaders to recognise separation as a life event.
What's being proposed today is not controversial. The problem that we all have is elevating this issue onto the radar screen of the general public, and we hope they will have employers who will understand, help and support them along the way.
The power of work to transform people's life chances is something that, you know, is really important to me. We're really pleased that we're at the forefront of this initiative, and I hope that lots of other employers will look at us and follow suit.
Going through a divorce or being separated can be obviously incredibly stressful and very emotional.
Big employers such as Tesco, Asda and NatWest are supporting a scheme that will give time off to employees who are separating.
The scheme has come from the Positive Parenting Alliance.
Employers will amend HR policies to state that separation is similar to a family death with serious.
Yeah, fundamentally, it's exactly the right idea.
I think it's a wonderful idea.
It's an important idea.
Yeah.
Hopefully that played all right. I got most of the voiceover, if not the music. So we can distribute that as appropriate. Really, yeah, hopefully just encapsulates some of the spirit of the launch. And then we were pretty positively shocked by some of the take up that we got during the launch. Some of it was slightly misrepresentative, as the press often are. This isn't about divorce leave or it's about supporting employees in the way that I outlined, for the benefit of all, which I'll come on to shortly. In terms of some of the big names we got signed up at launch, these are 7 of them, but these are the main 7. So we were really, really delighted to have such amazing organisations on board. And in total, that covers nearly 600,000 employees. So we were super delighted with that. Next slide. Oh yeah, some of the coverage, you've seen that. Next slide. Yeah, and just going back to why this is so important. It's really important if, you know, people separate without kids, it's really important without kids too. But if we can just, I think as Sir Andrew said, get this on the radar screens of important cultural leaders and businesses, we'll start to create the right conditions for a better separation. And what that means for employers is, I think it's a win-win. Your people, if they're going through this, are going to need this support, whatever. And some other stats we found, you know, like I think 10% of people left their jobs entirely. Lots of people felt they weren't doing a good enough job at work. With the right support, your people can deliver in the way they want to deliver. Often, you know, people want to work harder when they're separating. It gives them something to focus on. So if just acknowledging that people are going through this and giving them the right support means that they can kind of kick on through. You're helping them, but they will then deliver for you. And I suspect they will remember that in the longer term, that you were there for them in a really difficult time. And it's often something that employees will find difficult to raise. There's a lot of shame. You feel like you've made a mistake. So it's helpful if this can just be almost automatically raised, so that employees feel that they can get the help they need without having to ask for it in great detail. Next slide. There we are. What next? We're going to do something in education. So hopefully come back next year to talk to some teachers on this very panel. But yeah, that is a quick whistle stop tour of the HR initiative. Back to you, Sarah, or any questions?
Thank you, James. And I think it just raises such an important part about the information that employers have for anyone going through separation. And the reason why we asked you, James, as part of the Committee for Family Mediation Council, is to raise that awareness, but also talk about how it fits in with family mediation and make people more aware about the benefits and what family mediation is, to signpost employees to, because sometimes when you're at that crossroads, you want someone to help you and guide you in the right direction. So as employers, I think you're in a really good position to be able to do that. So I'm just going to sort of give a whistle-stop tour now for mediation, and then we'll come back to you, James, later for some questions on that. So one thing, I'm not going to go through too much information today about what family mediation is, because I know the people that are here on the webinar today, it's more a case about signposting, but I just wanted to give a bit of a whistle-stop tour about what it is. And like I say at the beginning, I am an accredited mediator. So mediation is a process whereby separating couples come together with a mutual third party, the mediator, to assist them in their discussions to reach an agreement that they can both live with. So mediation is a little bit different to court. There's no winner or loser. And for me to feel like I've done my job properly as a mediator, both people come out with an outcome that they can both live with. I always say as a mediator, I'm a bit like a referee, making sure that the conversations stay on track and blow your whistle when it gets a bit out of control. So on the next slide, so when can mediation help? So I just wanted to quickly run through this. So the two main things that I do as a mediator is parenting issues and co-parenting, and also financial and property as part of the divorce, if they're married. So in the parenting issue, we discuss the time that the children spend with each parent. We agree child maintenance, support payments. We sometimes help with grandparents dealing with things like that. Arrangements for school holidays and key events such as Christmas and birthdays. Other issues such as school choice can be a big deal issue, relocation, change of name. And one thing that often does come in, and I think as employers that we do talk about mediation, is often if we're talking about, and James touched upon this, about the time that they spend, sometimes you do need to make changes with your work to fit in with pickups and drop-offs. And I had a case recently where the father was working shift patterns, and he was liaising with his employer and coming back and giving information about how he can change his shifts to help spend more time with his children. So I think that does fit in quite, well, it might be that your employees are coming to you for, like James said, about flexible working requests and things, and it's just being mindful of how difficult this can be, where they've had an arrangement in place that worked well when they were both together under the same roof, but when you wanted to spend time separately, you might need to have them adjustments. The other thing that I help people with is, like I say, financial and property issues, how assets will be divided, what would happen to the family home, about maybe current payments until we've formalised separation, and how we're paying bills, and talking about maintenance payments and division of pension. So they tend to be the main things that we end up talking about. So just on the next slide, there's key principles of mediation. So I'm just going to run through this with you. It is a voluntary process, so we cannot make both parties attend mediation. It is confidential, which means that the discussions we have are private and cannot be referred to at court in a later date, which allows the participants to explore other options that they might not feel comfortable dealing with in open correspondence with solicitors or through the courts. My role is to remain impartial at all times, and even though I am a practicing solicitor, I cannot provide them with their own specific advice. So mediation is not to replace solicitors, it's to work alongside the advice that the solicitors give to them. And the participants remain in control and to reach the outcome. I'm not there to railroad anyone to making decisions they don't want to do, and it's to help them be able to make the decisions themselves. As a mediator, like I say, my role is to facilitate the discussions and have that professional presence in the room. So conversations that might have happened at home are a bit different when you're in a legal environment and I'm sat there at the other side of the table. So it just helps the discussions keep on track and keep real focus. And it might be that I suggest other solutions that they might not have even considered from my experience working with other separated families. So just a little bit about the benefits. It's a lot less stressful than going to court. It can save money. It's much cheaper than being represented in court. Helps put the child's interest first as well. And I always, look back at how it would affect any child that's involved. It keeps them in more control of their family's future. So if you go to court and you're asking a judge who's never met your child, only met you on that date, and you're asking them to make key decisions, you should be better placed to make them decisions in a controlled environment. It helps move on quicker. There's such delays at the court at the minute. You can make, get decisions a lot quicker than you could at mediation, than you would wait for a court hearing. It takes into account the voice of a child. I'm also a child inclusive mediator, which means that I can speak to children if appropriate within the process. But please remember, it's still the parents that make them decisions. It's just the child having a voice about decisions that directly affect them. And I feel like that mediation, it's coming out with a solution which makes arrangements work for them and to be more flexible. Because if you went to court, you could end up with an outcome that doesn't suit either of you and doesn't fit into your working commitments, and you're stuck with that arrangement. So it does usually have more longer lasting outcomes. And one thing that I really do look at in terms of mediation is improved communication. Because if you go to court, you could end up with, like I say, an order that's very black and white, where we look at more communication and long-lasting, like co-parenting relationships, which does in turn affect your day-to-day week. At work, a lot of the times when communication is difficult between like mum and dad in terms of parenting, it does reflect on your work. You're getting messages while you're at work on the day. And I think if we talk about boundaries and things about communication can really help. And we might look at communication apps like our Family Wizard or something like that to really help. So the next slide is just about how can you as employers assist. So James has touched upon this, and one of the things I was just saying is have information packs ready to send out if you're and have resources like even just the website of the www.familymediationcouncil.org.uk. Even just by sending that, there's so much information in there about mediation. There's a list of resources to help that's available on there. We do have the page for Family Mediation Week on this. There's lots of webinars that have taken place before that you can watch to help. So that's a really good place to start. And I feel like if you, as an employee, was getting some information from your employee, you would really feel supported. It might be that you create your own resources books or places that you do in your own information leaflet that's separate for your own area specifically, because the Family Mediation Council's more national, and look at it, you might want to look at even sending things about domestic abuse agencies local and things like that, and just having that support in place and being more aware of these local services. Could consider putting a policy in place, which we've talked about with compassionate leave, therapy, divorce coach sessions. Some companies that I've spoken to have even thought about offering 4 sessions with a divorce coach, for instance, to give them that emotional support. Because then if your employee knows that they've got that support in place, it can get them back to work quicker, makes them feel that they're able to make informed decision in a much better place. One thing that I'm quite passionate about, just touched upon as well, is about domestic abuse. And sometimes I think as employers and as employees, you're not aware of what else could be happening at the workplace. One thing that's come up in some of my mediation information assessment meetings of issues that separated families have gone through is like WhatsApp groups. People have these groups that are on there and people are sending messages all the time. And if you've got a very jealous, wife or husband and these messages, it's the effect that has. And sometimes if employees are like, I don't want to be part of the WhatsApp group, people are thinking, oh, it's because they're a bit antisocial. But actually, you don't know what is happening at home and the pressures that they're under by taking part in them groups and things like that. And it's just sort of being more mindful of how things happen. And one of the things that I helped in the previous firm I worked is having a domestic abuse policy in place and having something through, and how you help or having some support for that, which could be something that is happening in the background and affecting people's work as well. I appreciate I've just literally whizzed through family mediation there, and if anyone has any other questions or want any more information, then I'm always happy to speak to them. Another thing that can really affect an employee's work is their financial situation when going through a separation, especially with the cost of living crisis at the minute. I'm going to pass you to Gary from Adam Financial Planning, who's just going to touch upon that before we sort of have a general discussion between the three of us.
Thanks, Sarah. Afternoon, everyone. So yeah, as Sarah says, I'm an independent financial advisor. I sort of specialise in divorce and separation work. Now, the first bullet point there sort of talked about, signposting to financial support and what have you. And there are a few organisations that I can sort of share the details of that will signpost people to appropriately qualified financial advisors. But if I'm totally honest, the work that I've done in divorce and separation in the past, I think probably the best place to signpost staff to is the mediator in the first instance. Because the mediator, as Sarah says, they are a referee, but they're a lot more than that as well. And they will be able to identify very early on what the priorities are in each case. And it may well be that, finance is right up there at the top. It may well be that finance actually comes quite a way down the list and there's other things to get sorted first that will actually benefit the member of staff more quickly. So although there are organisations which will give you financial advisor details, I think actually going through the Mediation Council's website and actually sourcing mediation is probably as good a place to start as any. In terms of the financial side of things, I do a lot of divorce work, as I've said, and I get involved with contested divorce, which involves the courts, and I get involved in sort of the type of work that Sarah is involved with. And I know you should never generalise, but generally speaking, where you have an agreement that the two parties have actually kind of brokered for themselves, it's an agreement that they understand, that they can live with, and what have you. Almost invariably, I think that gives a better longer term outcome than one that's handed down by someone else who, as Sarah said, you might have only met for the first time that morning. So to me, if we can get involved with work that involves both parties sitting down with appropriate professional assistance in that meeting as well, that tends to get to a much better outcome. So the way that we tend to work, first of all, as I say, our role as financial advisors in this situation is totally neutral. So we're looking after both parties equally. We have no axe to grind. And I guess in addition to that neutrality, the other thing that we're really trying to bring to bear is a big dose of reality. Every case is different, but in every case, there will be sort of some constraints and limitations on the financial resources available. So what we've got to do, first of all, is to understand exactly what those financial resources are for both sides. We can see exactly what's in the pot that can potentially be shared. We then also need to understand quite clearly what the client's actual needs are, financial needs are going forward. And again, we've got to be quite realistic there as well, because sometimes you'll be presented initially with a set of needs that just cannot be met. And you've got to kind of drill down and look to see what really is truly important, what's truly critical to a successful outcome, and making sure that we understand exactly what the needs are so that we can then offset them against the financial resources that the couple has. And to make the whole thing understandable, we use a piece of software that allows us to actually model the client's financial future on very sort of easy to understand and digest charts, which map the future out from now all the way through to whatever age we want to map it to. And the beauty of using that software, that cash flow modelling software, is that both parties can see what the implications are of making a particular change to the proposed settlement. So if we start off with a premise, let's say, where one party wants to keep the family home and one party wants to keep all their pensions, you can run a model on that and you'll be able to show both parties how that actually looks for them going forward. And then if that doesn't work, which it often won't, you then start to look at other options like sharing the pensions, like selling the family home, splitting the equity and so on. And you can start to see how each iteration evolves and benefits the clients and actually gets them to something which it might not be absolutely optimal for either of them, but it's a solution that works and gives them the best chance of freedom and independence and peace of mind going forward. So that's kind of what we're looking to do, understand where the clients are now, where they're trying to get to, and then being realistic about what can be done with those resources that are available. And at the end of that process, obviously, what we're hoping to do is to have shown both clients a financial model where they say, yeah, okay, that works for me. They can sort of live with that and they can accept that, and then we can get it implemented and then they move forward from there. And one last little sort of point I would make on it is that the work that we do in that process is a completely separate piece of work. So we're just looking after the mediation and getting to a settlement through that process. But then what sometimes happens is at the end of that process, one of the parties, and very occasionally both, will actually ask us to carry on advising them going forward and to implement the plan and all the rest of it. So in some cases, we're still with that client years after the divorce. and we actually get to see firsthand what effect negotiating and brokering your own settlement, we see what effect that actually has for people and how it moves them forward, how they can actually put the past behind them. We see the sort of relationship both sides have with their kids and all that kind of thing. So it's nice for us to be able to see things on the other side where clients are in a place where when they were going through the midst of the separation, they probably couldn't envisage themselves ever being again. But we sort of occasionally get to see them happy, independent, self-esteem intact, with a package that actually works for them. And that's pretty rewarding. Okay, Sarah, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you, Gary. And I think that, like you just said, then it's really important. And I always say this in mediation about like a co-parenting relationship, that your kids might be older, but you still paths will cross older. If you go into a wedding or there's graduations, it's very short-sighted just to look at it in the short term. And I always sometimes explore in mediation, well, where would you see yourself in 5, 10, 15 years time? And sometimes having that joined up approach and a more amicable way of dealing with separation can really help someone's mental health and well-being. James, just some questions about what, sort of going back to what you were saying. You said that you'd gone through a separation. From your perspective, what do you think employees could do more of to support their employees? And also, what sort of things would you have liked to have seen happen when you was going through that?
Yeah, I think it's hopefully the main thing is kind of covered in the initiatives that we've suggested. I think just it being recognised as a thing, so there's easy access, I think is useful. One of the things you mentioned, and it's a key point of obviously today's presentation and the week, is, and I don't think this is an employer's responsibility, but they can definitely make a difference, is the easy access kind of pack of resources that we've provided just helps people understand there are different ways. I still think we don't talk about separation. All we know about separation is generally from TV and EastEnders, and we still think you go to court, and you can go to court. But that's like probably the worst thing to do. So being able to say, look, there are different ways, and to echo kind of what Gary was saying, if you can get somewhere together, it's going to be much better. So yeah, I think just acknowledging that it's a thing. Flexible working is a key one. Just enabling. I think just knowing that things are going to be a bit turbulent for a period, and somebody saying, okay, we've kind of got you. And actually, I think I probably worked harder then than I might have done before, but just knowing that I could take Wednesday afternoon off to pick up a child, or all that kind of stuff, just would have meant that I'm not worrying about my work performance or feeling guilty about not being there. And I think a lot of this has maybe changed post-COVID because there's a lot more flexible working, but those kind of basics would make a big difference.
Yeah, and I think the flexible working, even if you've not separated, I'm full-time with young children, and I never have worked full-time if it didn't mean that I could have some flexibility and be part of the school run on somewhere.
Exactly.
So I think it makes such a difference, doesn't it, with the flexible working anyway in your output. And I think sometimes, some of my clients, when I've done the mediation information assessment meetings, and I always ask the question, what support do you have in place? And not often they say they're employers, but I have had a few that have said, oh, my employers have been great. They've put me in touch with a counsellor or a therapist. And you can tell that the people that they're in much of a better place to look at making decisions moving forwards. Because it's a grief cycle when you're going through separation. If you're in the denial and anger stage, it's hard then to come into a session and look at future and getting that together. So I think that's really, made a difference, I feel. Gary, the current cost of living crisis must have an effect on people's relationships and the additional stress that we're seeing. And, I know from the assessment meetings that I do that has caused a lot of stress, and the pandemic when everyone were pushed together more recently and things like that. Do you have any suggestions how an employee can support their staff, going through that? So it might not be necessarily that they're going through separation, but just something in place or some information.
Yeah, I mean, there are sort of various websites out there, but probably the best ones to start with are kind of the government-sponsored ones. So I think Money Helper is a great place to start. Obviously, there is a difference between sort of guidance and advice. People will normally have to pay for advice, but guidance, is quite often available for free. So something like Money Helper, just having links through to that, has a very sort of broad range of areas within that you can get help with, whether it's sort of debt, whether it's just literally making ends meet, or whatever it might be, pensions and what have you. There's numerous different headings under which you can go. And then they will kind of then subsequently signpost you to places for further advice if you actually need more than is available through that particular service. So as a sort of starter for 10, just having access to something like that, I think is a really good starting place. There are sort of one or two apps as well that it would be possible for an employer to make available to staff, which again sort of give guidance and some assistance on the basics, and might even allow to sort of set up things like simple ISAs and saving accounts and so on if you're in that position to be able to start saving money. But I think if people are really feeling the pinch and it's things like debts that are bothering them and mortgages that they're struggling to pay, then I think services like Money Helper are probably the best place to start.
Yeah, thank you. And I've just remembered when you sort of saying that, there's the Advice Now guides that are really good, which is, free information. It's like you say, talking about divorce, and if you're going through child separation, they're always really good, useful things. So there's lots of information, and just sort of thinking while we're talking, there's like a lot of the big companies that you'd put, James, on there, like Asda and stuff, that probably have their own intranet. So even just having a page with some of these resources that people can go to can really help, can't they?
Yeah, and a lot is exactly, and Tesco, obviously a lot of these big corporations, it was a case of, it wasn't available then and it now is, and taking that information and using that information, it's, free for everyone to use, to put it in their own portals and in their own frameworks. Yeah.
And James, just when you went through your own separation, did you try mediation, or was you made aware of the benefits of mediation at the time?
Yeah, and I think it's a very sensible place to start, because I think there's a culture where in culture we think you have to go and have your day in court for whatever reason, and actually that's not sensible. So.
And the new guidelines that have come in effect over the last few years about the mediation information assessment mean we have so much that we have to go through, and there's a minimum of 50 minutes. Mine tend to be about an hour and a half, and you talk so much more as a mediator about what support you've got in place, how are you feeling, and there's a lot more than I would do when I do an initial meeting as a solicitor, because you want to give that legal advice. And I think there's so much more hand-holding you do as a mediator, and you've got a duty to signpost, give therapists and things, and I think there's a lot more emphasis there as a mediator than you probably would do going to see a solicitor first, than just considering about mediation. One thing that I know I've sort of chatted to you both before when we were sort of planning this webinar, and one thing that I always have said, it's always astounds me that if on Sunday, like, my husband left me, or say for instance he died in an accident, and I said I'm having 6 months off for work, I've got a 7 and 8 year old in turmoil, the employer would be, more adaptable to that and be sympathetic. But if my husband had left me, which my whole world's turned upside down, I was in love, didn't see it coming, that if I'd have took maybe work, there might be a bit like, well, come on, Sarah, pull yourself together. And I think that was conception. Do you sort of agree, James, in that way, that it is dealt with very differently, but it's still a grief, isn't it, of mourning the loss of the relationship?
No, it is, and it's also much more complicated, weirdly, scenario B than scenario A. So I think it's just helpful when it becomes a policy. The stats, again, I said are pretty flaky, but broadly 40 to 50% of relationships may end in some sort of separation. Then you don't feel so on the hook. It is something that's quite a natural thing to happen, and we don't want it to happen. So I think that clearly death and bereavement is an awful thing, and is a more impactful thing to begin with. But as you say, that's part of policies, and this wasn't. So it's just trying to close that gap appropriately, I'd say.
Yeah, and I think it's a bit like bereavement policy, and that what one person deals with, stress, anxiety, upset, is completely different to the other one. Exactly. So if someone's mum died or something, they might be quite happy just having a few days, but others might need months. It's each person deals with it differently. And I think separation, you need to be mindful that actually, so for me, probably be like, I need to get back to work, take your mind off things, sat at home wouldn't do me any good, but everyone's different and they need that time, don't they? And I think it's recognising that.
And also that separations will take many different forms. So again, this may not be and we've got line manager guidance. This may not be the employee doing that an awful lot down the line, but if you've got a really difficult separation, and you know this sadly does happen, one parent's not seeing their children in 2 years' time because of the way things have played out. It's just knowing that that's going to be even harder, and that's 2 years later. So it's just acknowledging that we're all, as you said, it's a journey with various different parts. So you know, being aware of that is super helpful.
Yeah, and I think having more of a joined up approach, that there's not one side fits all, and that some people might need like the financial advice from you, Gary, and that support, the emotional support from therapists, coaches, and you know, having everybody together can really help. And I think I had a mediation, a legal client recently where they, as part of it was a very difficult, high conflict case, and we'd gone all the way to a final hearing, and the husband felt that the wife should be working more than she is, and she'd said that her employer said that she couldn't increase her hours, and he'd got his new partner to phone up her employer to find out if that was true or not. She was so embarrassed at work and things, and I think it's little things like that as employers that you could get brought into it a little bit more than what you should, or when you're talking about flexible working, and if the employers said no, but that the other side of thinking, well, is that true? And you can get brought into it. So it's sort of having these discussions and being aware that things could crop up, and how you deal with that. I don't know what you think to that, James, but I think some things can crop up and employers get brought into it. Oh, you're on mute.
That if you're abreast and then more joined up, it helps, yeah, because it affects all sorts of your lives, and there could be all sorts of kind of horror stories. And yeah, the more that you know as an employer, actually, the more forearmed you are. And it's really about providing better support for people that hopefully are in your care long term and are going to provide for you as an employer. So yeah, more joined up is good.
Yeah. We've had a few questions that have come through, so I'm just going to address them, and if anyone's got any more, if they want to pop them in the Q&A box. So one of them was for you, James. Says James, training for a workplace family transition champion to help support employers is an option that is available. Would you advise organisations to look at this as a viable option?
I don't know too much about this, but it sounds like a very good option. Again, it's just having, you know, like we have mental health champions at work. It's just having somebody who can advise you. I mean, if I, you know, I could imagine. It sounds like that might be something I might have wanted to do at Unilever, because you're able to help people who can benefit from your experience. So yeah, that sounds like a good one.
Yeah, another comment that's sort of come is death always pulls people around to support the grieving person, but divorcing people can feel a bit ostracised. And I think that is a really good point to make, that it's dealt with very differently, but you're going through a lot of similar emotions and the way that you deal with it and the support, isn't it?
Yeah, I think there's probably a couple of lenses to that. One's more generally in the parents' promise is what we're asking people to do is what can happen is people go into their own groups, you know, and can pull apart. And what we're sort of asking for at that kind of level is, can you support a couple to separate well? And then to your other point, you feel it's not your greatest moment. And you can feel like you failed because you have in some way, I suppose, or the partnership's failed. And again, if we could just make it more normal at work, you maybe won't feel quite so embarrassed, or you know, or as you say, ostracized at the worst.
Yeah, thank you. Another thing that's come in, I've not thought of the benefits of financial support to employees until raised now, but it makes sense as this will impact a person's mental health and well-being, inability to perform at work. I think you've already answered this one, Gary, because it said, how should we signpost this service? But you sort of mentioned that before, you know, earlier on.
I mean, depending on the size of the organisation, how many locations it's got, and what have you, if it's, you know, based in one place, then there'd be nothing to sort of stop you looking at an organisation like the Personal Finance Society, which again has a website that allows you to sort of look up advisors that are members of that society in your area. And you can also specify what level of specialisation or qualifications you want. So you could, for instance, look to see if your business is in Hull, you could look to see what chartered financial planners are there that specialise in divorce in our area. And then you could maybe speak to that firm and then have them on, have them on your panel as someone to refer to if clients have got, if staff have got any sort of financial concerns. So you could kind of do it on a local basis with a firm that you sort of vet yourself and choose, or alternatively, you can just use those organisations on a national basis. Obviously, since COVID, we can all now give financial assistance remotely through Zoom or whatever. So almost irrespective of where the advisors are based, it's possible to sort of have a service with a firm, even if you're at the other end of the country. Yeah, I think, as we said, the cost of living crisis did squeeze people quite tightly in the last sort of year or so, and people were maybe a little bit more worried than they normally would be about finances. And sometimes it's just nice to be able to sort of bounce those concerns off someone. And again, have a bit of a reality check, because sometimes these things actually feel worse than they actually are in reality. And a lot of these issues are sort of transient as well. So just having that sort of reassurance of a chat with someone at a fairly high level can sometimes do the trick. But obviously, if that doesn't, then the staff member is then free to take it to the next level and arrange to sort of meet up, and chat things through at a bit more of a detailed level.
Yeah, thank you. James, you sort of mentioned when you said about what's next, and you were saying naming for schools and things. That's something we've been doing for Family Mediation Week.
Okay.
There's a seminar going on this afternoon for teachers about family mediation and offering that information. And one thing I've done at the firm I work at is we've bought 100 copies of a book called Split Survival Kit by
from Howard Rudkin.
Yeah, and we've sent our copies of that along with the seminar and things. So things like that we've already. So if you do need any help with trying to do that, we've been doing stuff with family mediation.
We'll probably we definitely will. So we're looking to launch early 2025. We've got the work to do, but we'll definitely take you up on that. Thanks.
One of the things that we're doing as well for Family Mediation Week, we've got a sheet that says how to find a mediator. It's not to information overload that the Family Mediation Council have created, so we'll make that available and send that out to you afterwards. James has just mentioned earlier that he's got some information that's on his website, so we'll send out the links for that, and to Gary O'Brien as well. So we'll get all that to you afterwards as well with the slides. One question that's just come through to me is about how to refer to a mediator. So in the slides, there's a slide that says that how to refer to a mediator, and it's got the Family Mediation Council website, because you can put in your postcode there to find the mediator that's local to you or that offers online mediation. You can choose one, and they've got little profiles and things on there. So thank you, and I hope this gives you some food for thought today to consider what you currently do, or when an employee is going through separation. We've got some really good information out there that's available, and I think today it was to sort of like start conversations and just having the information available if you do know that somebody's going through that difficult time. Yeah. Okay, so thank you. And this session will be recorded. So if you do know anybody else that you think, they'd be a benefit from listening to this, it will be available later this week, and that will come out, and we'll send everything through to you now. Okay, thank you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you all.
Thanks, James and Gary, for coming. It's been really helpful.
Thank you.
Thanks.